Prince Harry convinced himself that one last quiet appeal might crack open the door he had spent years watching slowly seal shut. What he did not expect was that his letter would land in front of Prince William during the most unforgiving hour possible, and that the reply would come back sharp, immediate, and final. William struck down his younger brother's urgent request for a formal peace meeting. Then Princess Anne delivered a confirmation even colder than the refusal itself. The royal family's private effort to stitch the relationship back together was not paused, not reconsidered, not delayed. It was finished, and Harry was left to swallow that verdict entirely on his own. Before we step deeper into what this truly means for the House of Windsor, make sure you're subscribed so nothing slips past you. Harry sent that appeal the way a man sends a final flare into the sky. He requested a closed-door meeting with William, King Charles, and Princess Anne, promising to arrive without advisors, without cameras, without prepared statements, and without any list of demands. A reconciliation summit, in plain terms, is a confidential family gathering meant to rebuild trust before anyone dares mention royal roles again. To Harry, this was never a bid for rank or duty. It was a plea to still be counted as a son, as a brother, and as a father whose children might otherwise inherit a wound they never chose. William read the last page twice. He set the letter flat on the wood in front of him and said nothing for a long moment. There was no flash of victory on his face. There was only fatigue. Years of broken assurances, leaked details, sharp exchanges, and repeated disappointment had trained the future king to understand that a single meeting could tear every scar wide open again. When palace staff pressed him for direction, his answer was blunt. No meeting would be scheduled. No reconciliation process would begin. Anne had already studied the same request through a formal private palace briefing prepared for the senior royals. The Princess Royal, a senior working royal long defined by her sense of duty, agreed that reconciliation simply could not stand without trust as its foundation. She refused to endorse another negotiation that risked spilling into yet another public confrontation. Only minutes after William's ruling, she confirmed the family-led effort was over. Harry received the answer through a telephone call. At first, the Duke was certain he had misheard. He asked for the words to be repeated. When they came again, he fell silent. The rejection cut so deeply because his request had never truly been about himself. Archie and Lilibet stood behind every line he had written. He feared that silence between the adults would harden into an inheritance passed straight to his children. Yet one detail stayed hidden from everyone else. Harry had slipped in a handwritten note meant for William alone. It spoke of their mother, of shared childhood, and of a vow the two of them had once made that neither would ever leave the other stranded. William read that too, and still, he refused. His decision had not been born inside that room. One recent betrayal had already convinced him that another meeting was simply too dangerous to attempt. To grasp why William could turn his brother away so firmly, you have to look past the palace language and see the emotional weight carried by Harry, Anne, Charles, and the future king himself. Behind every polished statement were four people holding four different versions of the same family tragedy. Harry saw rejection. William saw danger. Anne saw duty being tested by emotion. Charles saw two sons drifting past his reach. The decision was institutional on paper, but the pain underneath was intensely personal. Every person involved had something they could lose, and none of them walked into this crisis without being cut somewhere. The reconciliation had already collapsed long before Anne finally attached a name to that collapse. Harry's sharpest fear lived in the thought of Archie and Lilibet. He did not want his children to know their royal relatives only through old photographs, tabloid headlines, and stories about a rift they never caused. His appeal was, at its heart, an attempt to shield them from inheriting his exile. But the more forcefully he pushed for a way back in, the more William became convinced that pressure was being aimed straight at the very family he had sworn to protect. William carried a weight his brother could not fully understand. The Prince of Wales is the title given to the direct heir of the monarch, meaning that his private judgments can shape the future of the crown itself. He was not weighing the letter only as a hurt brother. He was weighing it as the future king responsible for Catherine, for his own children, and for an institution already worn thin by years of family friction. Charles sat with Harry's letter unopened for several minutes. The king longed to hear his younger son's voice, but he understood that forcing William into another meeting might rip the brothers even further apart. He reached for the telephone once, ready to step in. Then, before the call could connect, he stopped. Overruling his heir might restore contact with Harry, but it could also shatter the fragile trust he still held with his elder son. Anne felt no sense of triumph. After she confirmed the reconciliation was dead, the Princess Royal slowly took off her glasses and sat alone. That title identifies the senior royal position traditionally granted to the monarch's daughter. She had watched both brothers grow from grieving boys into divided men, and she knew precisely what her words had ended. Harry's handwritten note made the ruling even more painful. He admitted that anger had shaped choices he could no longer defend, but the apology stopped short of full ownership. William read those lines as conditional regret rather than genuine remorse. The future king also felt personally targeted because the appeal placed the entire burden of repair on his shoulders while ignoring the breaches that had turned trust into something dangerous. The four royals were not divided by one argument. Repeated disappointments had hardened every stance, but one private incident had turned William's caution into an absolute refusal. And once that betrayal came to light, reconciliation was never really able to recover. The emotional wounds explain the ache. But the true reason reconciliation crumbled sits inside a hidden chain of events that pushed William past the point of return. Months before Harry's final plea ever reached the palace, a quiet effort had already been made to bring the brothers back into the same room. It was low-key, carefully staged, and shielded from public view. No announcement was drafted. No photographers were tipped off. But one conversation during that private effort changed everything. William walked in believing trust could still be rebuilt. He walked out convinced that even the most intimate exchange could be turned into a weapon. From that night on, reconciliation was no longer a hope. It was a hazard. Princess Anne arranged the meeting at a private residence outside central London. She deliberately chose an informal dinner because palace formality had failed them time and again. The Princess Royal, a title traditionally reserved for the monarch's senior daughter, wanted Harry and William to speak without advisors, hovering, without prepared statements, and without staff dictating every syllable. Both brothers agreed that nothing said inside that room would ever leave it. Harry arrived, believing the dinner might reopen a path back toward family life. He told William that Archie and Lilibet could not remain distant forever. The Duke wanted his children pulled closer to the center of the family, not through titles or duties, but through simple personal contact. William listened carefully, then answered with a single firm condition. Trust had to come before access. That phrase changed everything. Days later, trust must come before access surfaced word for word inside a private briefing circulated among Harry's advisors. A private briefing is an internal summary shared within a small group to guide upcoming decisions or public responses. No official statement had been released. No staff had attended that dinner, and yet William's exact sentence had slipped out into another room. William confronted Harry by telephone. He demanded to know how a line spoken without witnesses had somehow crossed the walls. His brother denied authorizing any disclosure and insisted he had not broken the agreement. But the future king heard only another explanation without control. Another private promise, followed by a public danger. Harry's anger flared. He said he could not be held responsible for every conversation happening around him. The Duke accused William of using suspicion as a shield to avoid forgiveness. That accusation hardened William instantly. What Harry read as unfair judgment, William read as proof that responsibility would always be shoved onto someone else. Anne had warned both of them before the dinner that a single breach would mark the end of her involvement. Once the phrase leaked, she contacted each man separately through recorded calls and demanded a full explanation. Neither brother could provide one that satisfied her. The trusted mediator understood the experiment had failed. Charles learned the full picture later through a documented palace account. The king finally grasped why William no longer trusted private assurances. Even when Harry sounded sincere, William then returned Anne's handwritten seating plan. He folded it once, laid it in front of her, and said there would be no second attempt under the same conditions. The earlier betrayal had planted the fear, but only a direct face-to-face between the brothers would finally reveal whether any real bond still survived beneath the anger. William's written refusal should have closed the matter. Harry refused to allow it. Working through a private go-between, he secured a brief encounter with his brother before the palace could officially seal the request. No cameras were present, no senior aides stood by, no carefully polished speeches waited on the table, just two brothers standing across from the ruins of a bond once considered unbreakable. Harry came ready to plead. William came ready to defend his decision. Neither of them was ready for how quickly the past would rush into that room. Harry arrived at a private royal property after learning William would be there for a scheduled briefing. Princess Anne allowed 10 minutes, believing a direct exchange might prevent any fresh claim that the younger prince had been denied a chance to speak. A royal briefing is a private meeting where senior family members receive sensitive information and reach decisions before anything reaches the public. Anne dismissed the aides, closed the adjoining door, and left the brothers without legal teams, prepared notes, or palace phrasing to hide behind. Harry spoke first. The Duke asked William to greenlight just one family meeting involving Charles and the children. He promised silence. He accepted that no royal duties were being restored. All he wanted, he said, was a route back into personal contact before distance turned permanent. William did not soften. He said the conflict was no longer about geography, titles, or protocol. Protocol refers to the formal rules that govern royal conduct and access. The real fault line was trust. Every attempt to mend the relationship had ended the same way. Private pain became public material, whether deliberately or through the people surrounding Harry. Harry rested a hand on the back of a chair. He reminded William of the promise the two of them had made after Diana's death, that neither brother would ever let the other stand alone. The words landed hard. The future king's expression shifted, but his answer did not. William then admitted he had read the handwritten note over and over. He understood the apology tucked inside it. He understood the grief too. But regret without changed behavior, he said, could not rebuild safety. Harry heard punishment. William heard survival. Anne returned when their voices climbed. Harry turned toward her, expecting backing. The Princess Royal refused to give it. In that private moment witnessed only by the three of them, she declared that the monarchy could not keep reopening a process that damaged everyone each time it collapsed. Her role as mediator was finished. Harry asked whether the decision was permanent. William answered without lifting his voice. The process is over. Anne opened the door. The Duke stood frozen for several seconds before walking out. Harry believed personal anger had defeated him, but the refusal actually rested on something far larger: William's growing authority inside a monarchy already preparing for succession. The confrontation exposed the brothers' pain. Yet the true engine behind William's decision was the authority he now carried inside a monarchy tilting toward the next reign. Harry had appealed to a brother, but he received the answer of a future king. William's refusal carried weight, because the monarchy had already begun quietly shifting responsibility toward him. Charles remained sovereign. Still, decisions involving long-term family access, institutional protection, and the next generation increasingly passed through the Prince of Wales. Harry read this as personal power aimed at him. Anne saw something entirely different: an heir defending the stability he would one day inherit, even when that defense demanded an unbearable sacrifice. William's authority had grown quietly. The Prince of Wales is the title held by the monarch's direct heir, placing him at the heart of decisions shaping the next reign. Charles still held final power, yet anything touching Catherine, George, Charlotte, Louis, or the future architecture of the crown now required the heir's approval. Harry's plea, then, reached more than just a wounded brother. It reached the man now responsible for guarding the monarchy after Charles. The ripple effects stretched far beyond one meeting. Harry's return would require security arrangements, travel planning, private access agreements, confidentiality rules, and clear guardrails around the younger royals. William believed emotional goodwill could not replace boundaries everyone understood and honored. One shattered agreement could expose Catherine and the children to another wave of public conflict. Charles read the recommendation prepared after Harry's request and set it down beside a family photograph. A royal recommendation is a formal private assessment used to steer the sovereign's decision. The king stared at the photograph longer than the briefing itself. As a father, he wanted his younger son pulled closer. As monarch, he could not ignore the wreckage another failed attempt might produce. Charles briefly considered approving a limited meeting without William's backing, then stopped himself. The Princess Royal warned through a documented private consultation that overruling the heir would fracture the family's command structure and weaken every future boundary. If the meeting collapsed again, the damage would land on Charles, William, and the crown itself. William then made an unexpected offer. The prince told his father the palace could pin the entire refusal on him alone. He would absorb the anger. He would carry the blame. The future king did not want Charles remembered as the father who turned away from Harry during a desperate appeal. Anne's judgment tipped the balance. She stated that further mediation would fail because the brothers wanted incompatible things. Harry sought emotional entry before trust was restored. William demanded proven trust before any door reopened. The protective boundary became final. George, Charlotte, and Louis would not be pulled into an unresolved dispute between adults. Charles picked up his pen, hesitated, and signed the decision supporting William. He ordered that Harry be informed privately, without humiliation, and without any hint that he was no longer loved. Once Charles backed William and Anne stepped away as mediator, the rejection stopped being a private disagreement and became a new reality every member of the family had to face. The most painful part of Harry's rejection was not the formal wording. It was the silence that followed. No second call arrived from Charles. No private reassurance came through from William. Anne did not offer another path. For years, Harry had convinced himself the family conflict could eventually be reversed by one honest conversation. Now the very people who had once urged patience were pulling out of the process entirely. The prince was not being asked to wait. He was being told there would be nothing left to wait for. Royal staff received a direct instruction to treat the reconciliation request as concluded. No future date would be floated. No intermediary could reopen talks without a major shift approved by both Charles and William. An intermediary is a trusted person who carries messages between divided sides when direct contact has broken down. That role had once belonged to Anne. Now even she was stepping away. Princess Anne telephoned Harry herself. She told him she would continue to care about him as his aunt, but she would no longer ferry messages between the brothers. The distinction was brutal. Family affection could remain, but institutional mediation, the formal effort to repair a dispute through a trusted royal figure, was finished. Harry stayed seated after the call ended, phone still in his hand. The Duke had rehearsed arguments for delay, resistance, or new conditions. He had not rehearsed for Anne to withdraw completely. Anger had carried him through William's refusal. Her decision broke straight through it. The fury drained away, and grief took its place. Meghan found him staring at an unfinished handwritten message intended for Charles. She urged him not to keep begging for acceptance from people who had already chosen distance. Harry answered that this was not only about pride, it was about Archie and Lilibet, about his father, and about the fear that silence would harden into permanence. Charles felt the same silence from the opposite side. The king asked whether Harry had received the message, and when an aide confirmed that he had, the monarch dismissed everyone and remained alone. He had protected William's authority, but the father inside him felt the price instantly. Harry canceled the journey he had quietly prepared for Britain. The unused travel plan became proof that the reunion had lived more inside his hope than inside palace reality. When he asked to send another personal message, William declined to receive it immediately. The prince believed further contact would only manufacture false hope after a final decision. Anne then removed the reconciliation folder from her desk and placed it inside a closed cabinet. She did not destroy it. She simply ended its active life. The formal process was dead, but Charles still had to decide whether ending reconciliation also meant surrendering every remaining bond with his younger son. After the arguments, the signatures, and the final messages, Charles asked Anne to meet him without secretaries or advisors. There was no constitutional crisis to solve. There was no public statement to draft. A father simply needed his sister to tell him whether he had lost his son. Anne's answer was hard but clear. Reconciliation as a palace project was over. Love, however, did not have to be abolished alongside it. That distinction offered Charles comfort, but it also demanded he accept permanent limits. Charles met Princess Anne in a small sitting room and left the aides outside. The king did not ask whether William's decision had been correct. He asked whether Harry would understand that the rejection was about trust, rather than the total withdrawal of love. A formal reconciliation process means an organized effort involving meetings, boundaries, and agreed expectations. That process had failed. The father-son bond, though, did not have to vanish with it. Anne answered carefully. The princess explained that personal affection could remain, but it could not be used to bypass William's limits or slip Harry back into royal access. She had watched every attempt buckle under the same weight. One side wanted emotional entry first, while the other demanded proven trust before any door moved. Charles then admitted the fear he had hidden from everyone else. The monarch said he dreaded dying with his sons still divided. He feared history would remember the fracture inside his family more clearly than any achievement of his reign. Anne listened without interrupting. She knew false comfort would only delay the truth. Anne finally gave him the answer he did not want. The Princess Royal said he could not command the brothers to forgive each other. A forced reunion would produce performance, not peace. Charles held power over ceremonies, titles, and royal access, but he could not order trust back into existence. Some wounds, she warned, could be acknowledged without ever being healed. Charles made his choice. The king would remain personally open to private communication with Harry, but he would not challenge William's refusal of another summit. That narrow line preserved the father without weakening the future king. Anne drew her own boundary. She would not carry messages again, even for Charles. The trusted bridge had absorbed too much anger from both sides. From this point forward, every relationship would have to survive on its own honesty. William accepted his father's decision through a documented private conversation. The prince asked only that no promises be made involving Catherine, the children, royal duties, or another reconciliation process without his approval. Charles kept Harry's handwritten appeal inside his private desk. He would not send it into the archive. The request had failed, but the son's words still mattered to the father. With the family's private verdict settled, the announcement leaked into public view, where one image ended up capturing the full emotional weight of the royal rupture. By morning, the private rejection had turned into an international spectacle. Broadcasters argued over whether William had protected the crown or punished his brother. Commentators praised Anne's honesty, while others condemned the finality of her words. But the public response was expressed most powerfully in one simple moment outside Buckingham Palace. Two handwritten notes lay beside the gates, one backing William's decision, and another begging the brothers not to repeat the tragedy of their parents' generation. News of the refusal swept across television, radio, newspapers, and social media. The central fact stayed brutally simple. Harry had asked for one final reconciliation meeting. William had blocked it, and Princess Anne had confirmed that the family-led process was over. A family-led reconciliation process means a private effort organized by relatives to rebuild trust without courts, official negotiations, or public pressure. Now that effort had ended. Buckingham Palace offered no emotional defense. Officials said only that private family discussions would remain private. That restraint mattered. It suggested the decision had been weighed carefully and would not be reversed by headlines, public outrage, or sympathy for either brother. A small crowd gathered outside the palace gates. One woman placed flowers beneath a note that read, "Protect the future." Minutes later, a younger man laid another message beside it. Brothers should not become strangers. The two statements sat side by side, capturing the conflict more clearly than any television debate. One defended William, the other mourned Harry. A major morning newspaper sharpened the split even further. Its front page showed William arriving for a royal engagement, while Harry appeared alone in a separate image. Across the center, three words dominated everything: the final no. The headline framed the refusal as both a family wound and a constitutional choice. William's supporters argued that trust carried consequences. They believed the prince had a duty to shield Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis from another cycle in which private pain became public conflict. Harry's supporters saw something colder: a wounded son and brother permanently locked out after asking for peace. Charles became the figure many pitied most. The king had preserved stability, but the price was separation between his sons. Even those who defended the decision admitted the monarch now presided over a family settlement built on distance. Anne's reputation shifted overnight. The Princess Royal's confirmation carried weight because she had repeatedly tried to mediate. Her withdrawal signaled that every private path had already been walked to its end. William did not retreat. The future king pressed on with his scheduled duties and offered no hint of reconsideration. His silence said enough. Headlines could hand out blame, but the real verdict would be written by the choices Harry, William, Charles, and Anne made once the world stopped watching. There was no last-minute reversal. No secret invitation followed. William did not reopen the meeting. Anne did not return as mediator. Charles did not use his authority to force his sons into the same room. Harry's desperate plea had failed because the family no longer believed a formal reunion could survive without trust. The outcome was devastating, but it was clear. Reconciliation was not postponed. It ended. And in accepting that ending, each royal revealed what mattered most when love, loyalty, duty, and self-protection could no longer coexist. William's refusal stayed in force. No reconciliation summit was arranged. Harry's planned journey was cancelled, and Princess Anne permanently ended her role as intermediary. A reconciliation summit is a private family meeting designed to rebuild trust and settle major personal disputes. The royal household treated the matter as concluded, not delayed, and no official channel remained open for another attempt. Charles preserved only a narrow bond. The king left a private line of communication open to Harry as his son, but not as a route back into royal operations. He understood that personal contact and institutional reconciliation were no longer the same thing. One could survive quietly, the other had become too dangerous. Harry finally stopped sending new versions of his appeal. The Duke kept a copy of the handwritten note addressed to William, knowing his brother had read it, even though it had never produced forgiveness. That knowledge gave him no victory, but it ended the uncertainty. His words had reached the future king. They simply had not moved him. William felt no triumph. The prince had protected Catherine, George, Charlotte, Louis, and the future crown. But he had also accepted a brutal cost. The brother he had once promised never to abandon might never return to him in the same way. Duty had won, but brotherhood had suffered. Anne's verdict was finally understood. The princess had not declared that affection was dead. She had declared that the process itself had grown more damaging than the distance it was meant to heal. Her honesty ended false hope before it could produce another betrayal. Charles accepted what royal power could not command. The monarch could arrange ceremonies, grant titles, and control palace access. He could not manufacture trust between two wounded sons. His final act was not intervention, it was acceptance. Harry folded his unsent letter. William closed the briefing file. Anne returned to her duties. Charles placed the personal note inside his desk. 4 separate gestures, one final truth. The monarchy chose stability over appearance. Harry remained loved, but outside the circle of trust. William remained a brother, yet acted as an heir. Anne remained compassionate, yet refused false hope. Charles remained a father who accepted that some divisions cannot be repaired by command. The door did not close with anger, revenge, or celebration. It closed with the quiet recognition that the crown could only move forward once the family stopped pretending the past could still be undone. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.